Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Buddhist Perspectives, the quarterly show on the spiritual perspectives rotation on the odd fifth Sunday when it happens. I am your host, Nona, and today my guest is Patricia Wolff of Monterey Bay Zen Center. And we are going to be talking about today the intersect of Buddhism and nonviolent communication, otherwise known as NVC, and how this relates to our ultimately relates to our health. Um, doc, our guest, Patricia Wolff, through her many practices, seeks to connect to the miraculous, cultivate wisdom and clarity, nourish and heal through the nutritional, spiritual, and physical realms. And she has faith in the well-being of each of us. Patricia Wolff is a healer, mother, elder, and a modern day medicine woman who calls on her experiences in psychotherapy, psychology, homeopathy, chiropractic, and Buddhism to provide a natural health care and integrated exploration for over 30 years. She writes, when we know ourselves deeply and completely and cultivate unconditional friendliness towards the entirety of who we are, we embark on this path of no self, being connected to the enlightenment inherent in every cell of our bodies and the support and wisdom always available, we awaken to our interconnectedness. Patricia, welcome to Spiritual Perspectives.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and to see you face to face.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for coming on this beautiful Sunday morning. Let's start, Patricia. I really love what you wrote about the self and interconnectedness. And I want to come back to this again during this show and how this connects to your work as a healer. And I want to first set up, though, for our listeners with a deeper look into your connection to Buddhism and to the Monterey Bay Zen Center in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into this one practice of your many?
I think my embarking on my Buddhist practice, I think happened probably in the mid 70s when I was getting my master's in counseling psychology, and we had a guest lecturer who had a Buddhist practice and a psychology practice. And I just remember him talking about everything. It can be part of your meditation practice. I was in my mid 20s at the time, but he had children. He would talk about the image of his daughter climbing onto his lap while he was meditating, and just saying that everything can be meditation. Everything can bring you into that great state of awareness and our interconnectivity. And then fast forward probably 5 or 6 years, when I was practicing as a chiropractor, I had a patient that had a gynecologist that said, you two would love each other. You have to meet. So I went out with Renee Podik to meet her. And she was a Zen teacher in Los Angeles who had a woman Sangha. So that was really my first official experience with meditation. And I think what grabbed me so compellingly was this notion of when difficult emotions arise, difficult feelings, instead of doing everything we can to get away from them, was this notion of making this U-turn, and turning and facing whatever arose, instead of, in Buddhism, there's a core of Buddhism, whether it's Zen or Vipassana or Vajrayana, is the Four Noble Truths. This notion that we all have suffering in our lives. That's part of being human, as well as tremendous joy, but it's the suffering that often gets our attention. And that the reason that we suffer is that we're on this roller coaster, that we're always grabbing after what we think is going to bring us joy and pushing away what we think is going to bring us displeasure or pain, and that we don't understand. We don't understand that about impermanence, that everything changes. And we don't understand that there's no solid self, that we're changing continually, constantly. Stephen Hawkins once said that we are a series of chain reactions. This happens and that happens. And so much of how each of us responds individually is because of our upbringing, our heritage, our transgenerational relationships. So this notion of facing whatever arises, there's another spiritual teacher named Mary O'Malley who says, what's in the way is the way. And I love that. So I think I had spent the most of my life trying to get away from discomfort, kind of bobbing and weaving like a deer caught in the headlights. So I think that was probably one of the most compelling shifts of my paradigm. And this unconditional friendliness with oneself.
I love that phrase, unconditional friendliness, because so many of us are conditioned in this world not to be. How many of us have those negative messages that are happening within our own psyches? Well, there's so much that you bring up and so much to talk about. And I would love to do another show with you as well, doing more of a focus on healing. And we'll get to that also in this show as well. But today's show, I had reached out to you specifically because you have this unique dual and multiple practice going on with, especially I was seeking out someone who had a NVC, nonviolent communication practice, as well as this Buddhist practice. And so I would really love to explore the intersect of those two items, those two modalities, and see how they complement each other, or if there are any places where there's any difficulties between the two. But before we launch into that, could you also talk to us about your NVC, nonviolent communication journey as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first contact with NVC was, I don't know how long ago. It was our first Gulf War, whenever that was, with one of our Bushes in the presidency. So my timeline's a little blurry at this point. But we, as a Zen center, the Monterey Bay Zen Center, were very alarmed about this newest war that we were engaging, and there was a lot of kind of aggressive energy among us. And what became really clear was we needed to explore what's a Buddhist way of dealing with the painful subject of war. And I remember my root teacher, Zen teacher after Renee, Catherine Thanis, who passed away several years ago, in the first Gulf War, when we were bush bashing, and Catherine had said, that's not helpful, creating more aggression. What we need to do is see those characteristics that we're pointing the finger out inside of ourselves. And that war is a koan, a paradox, where we have to accept that there's war and at the same time doing everything to create peace. So fast forward a little bit to the next war, where the Zen Center created a social action committee. And I, as the head of our very small social action committee, started going to different peace events. And I went to one peace event that was bringing some speakers from Seeds of Change, which was an organization of Palestinians and Israeli reconciliation, but the speaker was Palestinian. And after the talk, and there was a potluck, there was a lot of anti-Israel talk. And having, I don't know whether it makes a difference that I had grown up in a somewhat Jewish household, but the fact that I was starting to feel unsafe and starting to feel attacked, I thought, oh my gosh, this is not creating peace. And I somehow found out about my mentor, Jean Morrison, who is at Nonviolent Communication Santa Cruz. She's become a very dear friend and a wonderful teacher. I invited her to our Sangha to talk about nonviolent communication. And that was, again, another life changing, paradigm shifting perspective. And what was so clear and what she brought light to was this thing that we do as humans. I feel bad, it's someone's fault. You know, it's kind of this immediate knee jerk reaction. I remember when we were on a long camping trip with my son when he was 2 and he's now 34. And we were camping and I was sitting on one side of, the campfire and he was on the other, and he tripped and fell and he came over and he hit me. And I was like, well, what are you doing? I had nothing to do with this. But, it's that human nature of I feel bad, it's someone's fault. And I think one of the things that was the most compelling for me, in addition to how I blame other people, how I also do so much self blaming. This I feel bad, it's either someone out there did something to me, or I'm having the wrong thoughts, I'm saying the wrong things, I'm having the wrong feelings. But there's a continual judging. And in the world of nonviolent communication, which over the years Jean and I have sponsored many workshops, and we've called them many different things: nonviolent communication, language of peace, language of the heart, compassionate communication. But this radical perspective that what we are moving towards is outside the world of right and wrong, but really in the world of what's skillful and what's unskillful. And the worldview that Marshall Rosenberg, who was the originator of nonviolent communication, is that we're all just looking to have our needs met. And that often the conflicts that arise are not because of our basic human needs, but our strategies for having those needs met. And in the nonviolent communication world, our needs are like red lights on the dashboard, our emotions, and if we can view them as these portals of transformation, this notion that no two sets of needs need to be mutually exclusive. And with this paradigm of seeing emotions as red lights on our dashboard, looking at new ways of being outside this world of right and wrong, judging, criticism, demanding, ultimatums, but really letting them shine the light onto what's really most important. And then offering us strategies for how we use language, both to understand ourselves more deeply, which is very, very in line with Buddhist cosmology. That one of my teachers, Lou Richmond, when asked why he taught meditation, he said, so we can deeply know ourselves. And by deeply knowing ourselves, our lives change. And so for me, nonviolent communication gave me a way of really turning poison into medicine, the alchemy of letting my emotions, there's that saying that there's a crack in a vase and that's where the light gets in. So using the tumultuous nature of my emotions to really be ways of the light getting in and shining the light on what's most important.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting that you talk about there's so much that you shared there, but it was interesting that you talked about the language with which you offered your workshops. And it always strikes me that in understanding the title Nonviolent Communication, that's a really interesting phrase that Marshall Rosenberg uses. This is his book that I have. And I think it was in a talk that I listened to of his, where he talked about how he really grappled with what to call the practice and what to call the book, because it does have a certain tone to it when you call it violence. That
Right.
word violence really evokes something in people. And to claim that it's nonviolent then automatically assumes that someone is being violent. But I think he finally settled on this title because he wanted to reach people who were struggling
Oh,
with violence, right? So, but that,
I
you
didn't
know,
know that. That's really interesting.
yeah, he tells this stories, and I was really interested in that because it's such a stimulating word, violence, but
Right.
he did that intentionally because he wanted to really connect with those who are really struggling and who are in that intense position of violent, having that affect their lives. And but he does say in his book that it's often been called compassionate communication as well. And that you know that the violent part, the word violence that he finally settled on, was ultimately inspired by Gandhi's take on the word. And so I'm just going to refer to his book here. He says that I call the approach nonviolent communication, using the term nonviolence as Gandhi used it,
Mm,
to refer to our natural state of compassion when the violence has subsided from the heart.
mm,
And while we may consider the way we talk to be, while we may not consider the way we talk to be quote unquote violent, words often do lead to hurt and pain, whether for others or ourselves. I think whether intentional or not, words do have this power.
yeah.
And so um, he goes on to say that in some communities, the process I'm describing is known as compassionate communication, with the abbreviation NVC, and that he founded the language and communication skills. Oh, the NVC is founded on language and communication skills that have strengthened our ability to remain human.
Mm.
Any thoughts on all of this?
Any thoughts on all of that? Many thoughts on all of it. Um, One of the quotes of Marshall Rosenberg that I really love, because he's done so much international work of peacekeeping with Israeli Palestinians, Indian Pakistani, I mean, all different. I mean, the irony of so many of the world conflicts, they're like brothers and sisters fighting brothers and sisters. And one of the things that he talked about is, can we be like a UN translator? Can we hear the words, the violent words, and translate them into deeper understanding, into the unmet needs? There's a saying that um, there are no enemies. There's only peoples whose stories we haven't heard yet. And in Buddhism, one of the many practices that I find, very, very helpful is seeing everyone as Buddha, seeing everyone, our practice is not one about grabbing onto something and trying to get something that's not already here. The practice really is of surrendering our attachment to thoughts, surrendering our resistance to really feeling our vulnerable, as Pema Chodron said, it's being on the hot seat, and connecting to what's bigger, what's holding us. As I said in one of my quotes on my website, um, from Reggie Ray, who has a book called Touching Enlightenment, I think is the name of his book. But he feels like there's enlightenment in every cell of our body. You know, we have everything we need for healing, for waking up, but we are in a trance most of the time. And that really, Buddha, as I'm sure you know, really means someone who woke up, someone that can wake up from the trance of our life. And in the nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg chose two icons, two symbols to represent the way that we want to be in the world, our intention of being in the world, of speaking from the heart, and that's represented by the giraffe. And the giraffe was chosen because the giraffe has that tall neck, so it sees the bigger picture. It has the biggest heart of a mammal, and its saliva can dissolve thorns. And I don't really understand why the other symbol, the jackal, was chosen. I did know at one point, but I don't remember. So the representative of and I know our listeners can't hear, but are you familiar with this chart, the schema? Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
holding up a chart from Nonviolent Communication in Santa Cruz, which is called the Circle of Life. And in the center of this is the giraffe, which is the symbol of this awakened heart. And in Zen language, we call it the bodhicitta heart, this awakened heart that is has three qualities. It's soft and gentle, and that's our compassion. It's clear and sharp, and that's prajna. This is intuitive wisdom for the benefit of all beings. And it's open, which is shunyata. It's unattached to outcome and understanding that the ball can come in any direction at any time. You know, because so often when we feel like our needs aren't met, it's because we think it should look like X, Y, and Z, but it'll come in the form of A, B, and C. But we're so intent on thinking it has to look a certain way that we're often like at a feast in a buffet, but we can't taste the sweetness because we're only fixated on one dish. So in this schema of acting from this awakened heart, it's about words, but it's also a way of being in the world. It's a presence and a way of being in the world, of listening, you know, without our habitual strategies of evaluation, blame, expectation, perceptions, false feelings, making no choice and ultimatums and demands. And what's really important and what we are continually finding tools and cultivating these tools of remembering our intention. You know, I think the most important thing is to remember the most important thing. And especially, I'm so grateful that I discovered this practice while I was still actively parenting. You know, I wish I had discovered it when my kids were even smaller, but this this way of communicating, of always remembering my intention for connection, for intimacy, for understanding, rather than being right, which I was at a wedding many, many years ago. And the father of my dear friend talked a little bit about his idea of his ideas about a good marriage. And he said one of his keys to a successful marriage was that you don't always have to be right. And it was like, you don't have to always be right. Oh my goodness. I mean, as ridiculous as that sounds, but like, oh my gosh, you don't have to always be right. You know, we can be outside the world of right and wrong. We always want to keep connection. We want to always have a choice. You know, we don't want to make ultimatums. And, you know, this is also the language of freedom. It's a language of freedom and kindness, and really examining our words. And let me know if I'm going on too much about, you know, stop me when you're ready for me. Okay. one of the tremendously eye-opening lists in the handouts that I always use is the words that we habitually use with our friends, our loved ones, our partners, our children, our colleagues, which are talking about how we feel, but the really words that are implicitly accusing. Words like I feel attacked, I feel invalidated, overpowered, rejected, threatened, trapped, bullied, diminished, unappreciated. These words that you say, well, what? I'm just talking about my feelings. But one of the eye-opening, life-changing things was just looking at these lists of words that really are implicitly blaming. So any feeling word that we use that can be have added a by you are words that are not going to be creating connection, are not going to be creating peace. They're going to immediately make someone defensively. So for an example, another one of my lists are when you say that I'm feeling abandoned by you, the feelings that are really true that aren't blaming, or I'm terrified, I'm hurt, I feel bewildered, I feel sad, I feel frightened, I feel lonely. And our emotions are always pointing to unmet needs. And really underlying almost all of our emotions, all of our anger, all of our fear is love. Really at the basis of everything. If we, as most of us know, we get angriest at the people we love. If you say, I feel betrayed, really we're feeling angry, we're feeling hurt, we're feeling enraged. And the need that it's pointing to is I want to, trust, dependability, honesty. So in the beginning of most nonviolent communication workshops, Gina and I used to facilitate week-long ones. I was her assistant at Esalen. And the first day was basically one looking at how feelings were dealt in our families of origin. And that in and of itself could be an entire day workshop.
That is a deep, deep well for all of us. And I think not just in our immediate ancestry, but our lineage as well.
Exactly. I know
And
for me, being brought up, having, a lineage of Judaism, there is a transgenerational sense of feeling never part of, being kicked out, being victim. There's that inherited awareness that, we're always getting kicked out of countries and put in concentration camps. And every culture has its own variation of transgenerational pain.
I'm going
And
to pause you there,
yeah,
Patricia, real quick, because we've hit the top of the hour. It is 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. You've got it tuned to KMUD, and I'm going to kick it over to Javier over at the station to do any announcements and modes of business. Javi?
Thank you for the wonderful program this morning. Good morning, Cayman listeners. It's 10 o'clock. You got to tune to KMUD Garberville, 91.1, KMUE Eureka, 88.1 KLAI Laytonville, 90.3. You can always find us at kma.org live and archived. So if you're just tuning in, you can go back to the archives and click on spiritual perspectives. And we are in Shelter Cove, FM translator K258BQ, Shelter Cove 99.5, 72 degrees here in Redway, California. Let's kick it back to Nona and Patricia with the current show this morning, Buddhist Perspectives.
Thank you so much, Javi. I appreciate you being there, taking care of the technical sides of things. And yeah, so Patricia is here with me, Patricia Wolff of Monterey Bay Zen Center, and we are talking this morning about the intersect of Buddhism and the practice of nonviolent communication, NVC, otherwise known as compassionate communication, as written by Marshall Rosenberg, but he also tips his hat and says it's a very, all the practices have been around for a very long time. And we're talking about how it's really important to look at our own internal processes instead of looking outwards and falling into our human habitual patterns of, if something bad happens, then somebody is to blame, and how we can start looking at it in a different way. And Patricia, you've used the term doing a U-turn multiple times and starting to really do that in our work. And I wanted to, and we were just before the break there, we were talking about how part of that is looking at our history, looking at our transgenerational history, our heritage, all of our wounds that cause us to be easily stimulated. And I wanted to ask you, well, let's return to that topic because it's such a big, deep one, and how Buddhism actually comes into the picture there.
Yeah. So I was talking about looking at how feelings were dealt with in our family, but also looking at needs. And Jean Morrison from NVC Santa Cruz has, I don't have my deck, but she has feeling cards. She has decks of cards that have feelings and emotions. And in the beginning of every workshop, if it's in a big space, we'll have big laminated needs cards, or I'll just hand out at random maybe 5 or 10 different needs cards to each person, and like intimacy, creativity, joy, love, mourning, order. They're endless, these cards. But I usually have people look at their cards and say, is anyone here willing to live without these needs for the rest of their lives? And different ones might be most important at that time, but our needs are universal. And in the Buddhist, my Buddhist training helped me find ways of sitting on that hot seat, of being present, understanding, recognizing my own triggers, my own needs, and finding ways of being with the discomfort of being human, which is, that's where I feel like the intersection of Buddhism and nonviolent communication, they both offer such related things, but it's said in language. Rousseau, who wrote about the history of language, said that language is 55% body language, 38% tone, volume, ums, ahs, the little comments we make, and 7% words. So much of our communication is internal, and so much of our triggering can feel unbearable. And I think that's part of our knee-jerk reaction. I feel bad, it's someone's fault. And we know that in studies of chronic pain, of chronic physical pain, but it really relates to emotional pain as well. The more our amygdala gets triggered, the more our fight or flight part of our brain gets triggered. Let's say you're walking into a room and you stub your toe. Who left that chair there? Immediately. The more easily the pain fibers get triggered. So the more of an emotional impact we bring to each moment, the more we're creating the Grand Canyon of our suffering. The more we go to it. And what Buddhism brings us, in Zen, it's mostly Shinkantaza, just sitting. And my roots are Zen, but I have found so much value in so many different types of practices to help us sit on the hot seat, to help us really face our vulnerable hearts, our tender, vulnerable hearts that we have developed layers upon layers upon layers of defenses to try not to feel the pain of sadness, of being left, the fear, so many things that happened intentionally or unintentionally. All of us, growing up have trauma, some big trauma, some just little traumas, like not getting picked up when you were hungry or scared, or being afraid of a loud noise. Even with the most wonderful, caring, conscious parents in the world, we all have been triggered, and we all develop strategies for not having to feel the pain of our humanness. So the practice of meditation helps us. It's been said that our practice is being present for the waves of our life, the relative self, the fear and the triggering and the self-righteous indignation and feeling like a victim, all these qualities of our small self, our humanness, while at the same time having our feet at the bottom of the ocean with our feet firmly planted in our interconnectivity and this great space of awareness. This, some people call it God, some people call it the great space of awareness, but that we're always connected to this everythingness and this love that is our basic ground substance. And I was listening to one of Tara Brach's offerings lately, and she was talking about how important it is to be present for the waves, to know ourselves deeply. And in Buddhism, this practice of deeply knowing ourselves. In our Zendo, we sit facing the wall with our eyes mostly closed, but aware of everything that arises. And it's amazing the universe that can arise when you're sitting facing a wall. That person's coughing too loudly, that person's moving. Oh, I should have said this, I should have done that, how dare, this whole world of insanity that we don't even, we're sitting facing a wall, and the richness of our insanity. So that's the waves of our life. But our breath and our presence and our mindfulness is our ocean. How do we become ocean ourselves, using oceaning as a verb? I love this notion that love is not something that's given or taken. Love is it's like the oxygen we breathe. It's who we are, what we are. But we think it's something someone gives us or we give to someone, but it really is our ground substance. And so our Buddhist practice gives us ways of feeling the waves of our life, but letting them be contained in the oceanness of our being. And this interconnectivity that we have with all of us. Ram Dass says we're all just walking each other back home. And Thich Nhat Hanh says our practice is finding our home in our hearts. And this practice of being human takes tremendous amount of compassion, both for ourselves and each other. The more compassion we have for ourselves, it ripples out into the world. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to really face our own insanity. Again and again, people in the beginning of a meditation practice, they think they're just going to find immediate peace. And it's like, oh my God, I didn't realize I was this insane. So there's this disruption, but you can't have transformation without disruption. And this finding the ability to have compassion for what we find out about ourselves, and therefore we can let that compassion extend out, ripple out into the world. So courage, compassion, and courage actually comes from the word from the heart. Curiosity, we have to be really curious. Okay, what's really going on here? And are you familiar with rain? It's also a valuable practice that I think it was started by someone named Michelle McDonald. I could be wrong about that. It's been very popularized by Tara Brach and many other people. But it gives us tools for being human. The R of the acronym RAIN stands for recognize. Recognizing when we're hooked, when we're triggered. When our jaw gets tight or our heart rate starts escalating, or we have that self-righteous indignation. In what universe would someone do da, 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 or feeling like a victim? Oh, they always are doing this thing. Whatever is our thing, recognizing that's the first step. The second is allowing the feelings, letting go of the story, letting go of the stories that we're believing, not believing everything we think, but feeling the truth of the feeling in our bodies, feeling the tightness in the chest, the constriction in the throat, the pit in the stomach, the clenched fist, the tight jaw, feeling it, allowing it. The I stands for investigate. So being curious, investigate, inquire, okay, so what's really happening here? What's really happening? What am I believing that's making me feel this way? And what do I really need? So shining the light, letting your emotions really guide you to your sweet, tender heart. I can't tell you how many times a day I go through a mini version of this practice. How many times with all my skills as a psychotherapist, as a practitioner, as a teacher, I get triggered again and again and again and again. And how many times I have to go through, okay, what's really happening? What's really most important? Investigating what's most important, what my deepest intention is. And then the N stands for nurture. And that's connecting with this interconnectedness, this great space of awareness, this, in the Indian, the Shiva Shakti, the dance of the male and female, our lives are really dances of polarity, but really beyond the world of right and wrong. There's that Rumi quote of, I'll meet you in that field outside the world of right and wrong. And sometimes it's just as simple as holding your hands on your heart and stroking. There's a technique called self-havening, and I've forgotten the name of the developer. But when you get too triggered and you just need to calm yourself down, you can gently stroke your face, gently stroke your arms, and gently stroke your hands, coming back into the vagus nervous system, the rest, digest, the caring and attending to your own sweet, tender self. And then after doing that, then you decide, okay, now I'm understanding what's really happening. I'm understanding how I'm feeling. I'm understanding what's really important, what my needs are. Do I need to have a conversation? And that's where the NVC comes in. Yes, I do. My husband said that he would clean the dishes. And when I came home, the dishes were left in the sink. And, order is really important to me, or trust is really, whatever it is. And again, when we get to the point where we actually start using our words and interacting with someone, that's where the NVC has all sorts of really valuable tools of ways of phrasing what's really happening in a way that someone can listen. I remember in the beginning when my son had just gotten his driver's license and he wasn't coming home for dinner. And I was pissed, or maybe can I not say that on radio? I was upset because family dinners are so important and I wanted him to be well nourished, blah, blah, blah. So I brought it to one of my first NVC workshops with Jean. And, the first thing she said to me was, this is not a workshop to tell you how to make people do what you want them to do, right? And I was like, oh, darn, no. And she said, okay, so, you have a need for nourishing, to be a really good parent, for intimacy, for family, for connection. What do you think your son's experiencing? What needs is he meeting? And I thought, no, autonomy, friendship, community. I go, oh. So in the NVC world, first you figure out what's going on. And then when you're going to have the conversation, either if it's just to yourself, objectively, just the facts. So I wouldn't say you're never coming home for and you're disrespecting me. To my son, I would say, you know, you didn't come home for dinner on Monday and Wednesday, and I'm feeling a little sad and a little angry. You know, so I'm just first of all stating objectively, what would a camera see? Not you were being inconsiderate, because a camera can't see that. But a camera would see someone came home for dinner, or if a kid's room is a mess, you don't say, oh, you're a slob, your room's a mess. When I walked into your room, I saw candy wrappers under the bed, I saw clothes on the floor, you know, just the facts. So back to my son, understanding his needs for autonomy, for fun, for friendship, for freedom. I said, would you be willing to come home for dinner on Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays? And he said, yeah, I can do that. So first you objectively say, this is what's going on. You second say how you feel using words that are non-accusatory. And there's many nonviolent communication websites. You can get ample lists of non-feeling words, of feeling words. You let your feelings be the crack where the light comes in. Understanding really what's the most important thing. What needs are you attempting to have met? And then you make your request in a way that's very direct and succinct. You know, you have to be specific. So you don't say, clean up your room. You say, could you fold your laundry? Could you throw away your dirty wrappers? And could you, you know, because what a 6-year-old sees as neat is very different than what, you know, a 60-year-old sees as neat. You know, so using these rules of nonviolent communication, you offer these tools that create connectivity, that are beyond the world of right and wrong, and that leave choice. So you also are not saying or else. And the other thing that's a really important aspect of nonviolent communication is when someone says no, they're saying yes to something else. And continually I'm reflecting on what it is I want rather than what it is I don't want. I remember when I was younger and doing more mountain biking, and I would be on trails that were a little more challenging, I'd see, you know, a bush or poison oak in the path, and I'd be thinking, oh, don't want to run into that bush, don't want to run into that bush, and crash, run into the bush. And I finally got it. Oh, you have to pay attention to where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. And that was, again, continually asking yourself, what are you saying yes to? Remembering to remember what's most important. Because a very important aspect of Buddhism is living a life by vow. We chant every time we sit together, beings are numberless, I vow to awaken with them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become them. Which is really so consistent with this life of being human. You know, beings are numberless, I vow to awaken with them. You know, one of the things that happens when we get triggered, we go into this trance of anger, of victim, of blame. And we want to continually wake up from the trance. Delusions are inexhaustible. We're constantly making up stories and believing our stories. You know, so we're vowing to really examine our stories and wake up. Dharma gates are boundless. Dharma gates are all the ways we get triggered, and all these portals of transformation that we're vowing to walk through these gates. You know, walk to the other shore. And in the Zen tradition, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. You know, this is a practice of if one awakens, the whole world awakens, that there is no other, you know, outside the world of othering, of right and wrong, and my group, and, you know, that other group be damned, that there is no other. And Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. This path of curiosity and compassion and courage and reconnecting again and again and again and again to what's bigger. I don't know if you've seen the movie Avatar, but the Avatar, they would sit and she would plug her braid into the earth. And that's kind of what I feel like my meditation helps me do. It helps me remember that I'm part of all of this. And there's always resources available, there's always guidance, and there's always support. But we forget, So the practice is really not about trying to become something that we're not, but remembering who we really are.
I love that, Patricia. So, some of the words that you use, that talking about this trance that we enter when we get into this state of being triggered, and possibly transcendence being the shift out of that trance state into something bigger, this interconnectedness that you talk about. And I promise that we return to that word interconnectedness and really link that to both Buddhism, NVC, and even health, which you are a health practitioner. And while we do this, I also wanted to open up the lines for this I was going to try to do it for the last 10 minutes, but we're down to the last 7 or so. If Javi, would you please be willing to give out our number here at the station where they could connect with you and get any questions on for Patricia?
Number here is 923 area code 707-923-3911.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So if you call in, Javi will get you connected to Patricia, our guest here today from Monterey Bay Zen Center here on Spiritual Perspectives, Buddhist Perspective. So
yes, health. I do have something to say about health and othering. I've had many injuries, but especially these last couple of years. And one of the things that I noticed is how I even othered an injury of my own. I would feel my shoulder. Oh, it's still tight. It's still hurting. I would bring this aggressiveness to my body part instead of loving. Oh, you poor sweet shoulder. Oh, and loving my shoulder into healing instead of bringing fear and tension and tightness and even this aggressiveness. So I learned many years ago, whenever there's an injury, it's the first thing to do, if possible, stop, breathe, connect, and love. Bring love into it instead of fear and anger. And with chronic pain, which is a very, it's a difficult thing, but the more love, the more we can also attend to what's working. I think one of the gifts I offer, that we can all offer, not just me, is that I see my patients and their wholeness in what's working, and they see themselves with just what's not working. And I think, having a loved one or someone who cares that can hold that space, because when someone's depressed or someone's ill, that's all they see. They forget their oceanness. And so with healing and our bodies, I could do 5 hours on just digestion. Trungpa Rinpoche once said, if you're not anxious, you're not paying attention. A Tibetan teacher. And I sometimes see, because I'm treating so many stomach stuff, if you're not having a stomach ache, you're not paying attention. Because we know our stomachs are centers of our emotion. They produce our immune system in addition to other parts of our body. Our neurotransmitters, the stomach brain connection, the stomach mind connection. So everything's connected. And actually, are there any questions, or I'll keep talking?
Yeah, I would love to have you on for another show that I host, which is Chi Talks, or sorry, we're calling it Talking Chi now, where we talk more about the health aspects and the wellness aspects of meditation and whatnot. I'm wondering if, please do go on, but I also want to connect the internal healing with also the external healing that occurs between people as well.
Well, I think so many of us are so porous that it's almost hard to know sometimes in really long-term relationships what's them and what's us. Well, ask your question again, because I'm not sure I'm answering it.
I was going to ask you about interconnectedness and how that plays out, I guess, in our healing, not just internal to ourselves, but also external to ourselves, and how those two things might be related.
Well, I think one of the most important things is kindness. You know, kindness for me is a driving force. And also, before something comes out of my mouth, I ask myself 4 questions. In the best of all times, this is what I do. 1 is it true? 2, is it kind? 3, is it beneficial? And 4, is this the right time to say it? So, you know, sometimes it's not the right time to verbalize something, even though it feels really urgent. But what's really clear to me is that nobody wakes up in the morning saying, I'm going to be a real asshole today. We're all doing the best we can. And even when I'm the one that's acting in a way that I'm very displeased about or having the wrong thoughts, I can still bring compassion to myself. That for me to be speaking in a way that, you know, I have a lot of tendency to be self-critical, and I know as self-critical as I am, then I project that out onto the world. So I have to keep coming back again and again to being compassionate to myself, even when I'm not living up to my standards. You know, this trance of unworthiness, I should be somehow different or better. And the kinder I can be with myself and the more compassionate I can be with myself, and the more, and I also know the more often, sometimes my biggest teachers are the people that are triggering me the most because they're showing me my shadow side. So back to the interconnectivity, first we have to invite all of our own demons up from the basement, you know, all of this people and selves and strategies that we've employed for our lives to try to protect the soft heart of ours. You know, first we have to invite them all up to the table for dinner, you know, the cranky one, the selfish one, the judgmental one, the, you know, whatever ones you've got that want to come for dinner. And once we make peace with those others, there'll be less and less others out there in the world.
And on that note, Patricia,
Yeah.
that was beautiful. I feel like we could talk on and on about this, and I do want to have you on again as our guest once more to go more deeply into all these practices. We've come to the end of our spiritual perspective show for today, Buddhist perspective. Patricia, let's talk once again next time, and thank you everyone out there for listening. This has been a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on, Patricia. It's really wonderful to have and hear and be reminded of all these things that we could do to be more kind to ourselves and to others. And yeah, you've got it tuned to KMED, and it's Sunday morning, 10:30 a.m. I'm going to kick it on back to the station where Javi's engineering for us. Thank you so much, Javi. Thank you, Patricia. Is there any way that people can reach you before we sign off here?
Oh, yeah. My website is Dr. Patricia Wolff, WOLFF.com. So Dr. Patricia Wolff, WOLFF.com. I also have free Zoom guided meditations Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 12. to help with this practice. So that's also on my website if people want to just show up for a 12 o'clock noon, a Zoom meditation 3 days a week. That's available.
Thank you so much again, Patricia. It's been wonderful to have you. Sincerely, Javi,